Hey there, my name is Alex or Mont, and in this video I'm going to talk about some of the updated item descriptions we got in the recent Scholar of the First Sin patch. I say some because it's entirely possible I didn't catch them all. I more or less sat down on patch day and looked through every item I had, and tried to note down which were new, but if I missed any please do share them in the comments. So we'll be having a look at new item descriptions and talking about what implications they could have. There won't be any talk about the Scholar himself, as I'll keep that for a future video. But I know some people are interested exclusively in the new items, or rather, the new descriptions of the items. Let's get started, shall we? And we'll start with the fake item descriptions. I say fake because they weren't in the new patch. The most interesting of them was an, apparently, faked update to the Soul of the Rotten. They used his name Grith and named him as the Sunken King, the King of Shoulder. I found that interesting because it seemed like it could be feasible in some ways. But whether or not it was just a Photoshop job or something that's coming out later, we don't know. I'm having looked at it again, I'm assuming it's just a fake that somebody made. That out of the way, we'll move on to the new stuff. And I have to talk about the changes to the Chaos Hood and Chaos Shield, because these are some of my favourite updates. The Chaos Hood now reads, Hood worn by a Chaos Sorcerer. The man claims to have sealed himself away, but who's ever heard of sentient magic? It is no doubt difficult to judge the veracity of the man's words, but this hood certainly seems to possess an unusual power. In the past, all it said was, he calls himself Navan. Now this is interesting because the hood was one of the only flaws I had with a theory of mine I put forth about Navan a while ago, which you can read more about in my lore video on him, shameless plug. So I hypothesized that Navan was not the name of the body that, is there trapped away, but rather the name of the entity, the spell possessing the body. I had the impression that Navan was a man once executed, but then in death he became a form of living hex to achieve a twisted variation on immortality. And the body we find him in belonged to a royal sorcerer of sorts that was unfortunate enough to summon him forth. And then we have the Chaos Shield. Once a brilliant young sorcerer cast away his earthly desires, devoting himself entirely to the dark that bewitched him. Nebulous, inky and serene, the dark holds an allure matched only by the fear it strikes in men's hearts. Could it be nature, holding a mirror to mankind? This one in particular is interesting because the brilliant young sorcerer could, in my eyes, be Navan, the body that Navan is possessing, or indeed Falcon. So we know that Falcon has an association with the Chaos Shield after all, and whilst he might have not been specifically a sorcerer, we know that he was talented and has since apparently abandoned everything in pursuit of the dark. And it's just one more curious link between Falcon and Navan. Let's have a look at some souls next. The updated description of the Duke's dear Freyja has also partially confirmed something I speculated on in the past. It seemed to me that Seath's soul, and yes, that's very fun to say, Seath's soul, whether or not it actually is Seath himself is up for debate, but I think the madness of the Duke has been imparted onto the soul he was given, so that now anyone who comes into possession of that soul will inherit, perhaps, a piece of that madness. To put it another way, I feel that Seath has left an imprint on the soul once given him by Gwyn. And this soul, I feel, has possessed a spider, and then eventually it became what we fight. The updated text reads as follows. The writhing ruin is an ancient thing whose shadow remains cast over the land. It first took possession of a solitary insect, but grew in power, feasting on the wealth of twisted souls found in the land. Next up there's the Giant Lord, and this is one where I turned out to be wrong, in fact. Well, kind of anyway. Many people have speculated that the last giant is in fact the Giant Lord, and I could see both sides of the argument. I mean, it made sense to me either way, but generally I lean towards it not being him. And my logic for that was, well, we kill the Giant Lord and he vanishes, and we obtain his soul. But as it turns out, it looks like we merely defeated him and then he was dragged below Cardinal Tower and locked away, until we find him again, many, many years later. And he remembers us even though we haven't fought him yet. Convoluted time indeed. Incidentally, his soul also tells us that Vendrick crossed the seas to fight the giants, as we already knew, but what he took from them, we never knew until now. And as it happened, what Vendrick brought back were actual giants. That was the treasure that he stole, apparently. For some reason, Nashandra seems to have compelled him to raid the giants in an attempt to steal their power. Even though he succeeded initially, that is where Vendrick's descent into darkness seems to have begun. Speaking of Nashandra, let's cover her and her sisters, starting with Miss Desire herself. Her new soul reads as follows. Soul of Nashandra, Queen of Dranglake, the fragments of the abyss of untold origin nourished their beings by the sides of would-be monarchs. Perhaps they were simply ordeals on the way to kinghood. One day, the flames will fade, and only darkness will remain. Unless, of course, an heir arrives. First up, what do they mean by of untold origin? We've previously been told exactly their origin, and that is Manus. Odd. Beyond that though, it's merely explaining what we already knew and telling us that, indeed, they feed off the power of their kings, each of them representing a powerful emotion. It seems they sought out monarchs that might best suit them in particular. And then there's this from the Bow of Want. Light and dark are two sides of the same coin, much like the soul and the curse. The beings who presented themselves to those in search of kinghood were drawn to their awesome strength. There are some very obvious parallels between Nashandra, Alana, Alsana, Nadalia, and our very own Emerald Herald. Both present themselves to those who would be king, for starters. Although it seems they are naturally attracted to the magnificent souls that Vendrick, the Ivory, Iron and Sunken Kings possessed. And if Nashandra is the dark, what does that make Vendrick? This sentence seems to be commenting on how the stronger the light, the darker the shadow. Meanwhile, the ancient dragon soul explains to us clearly that the soul itself was created by those who peered into the essence of the soul. Does this mean that dragons do not in fact have souls? Because that was one retcon to Dark Souls and Dark Souls 2 that I really didn't like. The fact that dragons apparently now had souls. But maybe not, as this new item seems to perhaps indicate. Are they all artificial dragons then? But if Vendrick and Aldia created the soul, how can the dragon be ancient? Only more questions from that. Vendrick's soul postulates that the power of his soul drew Nashandra to him, and he was overwhelmed subsequently. And it also remarks that he once ruled the world of men, which is odd, because that would imply that Dranglake was the only kingdom, surely. Or rather, it would imply that Vendrick was the empire of every land we know of that exists. I'm assuming that Mira and Ferosa, at least, existed around the same sort of time as Dranglake, because, I mean, as you know, Lucatiel comes from Mira, so obviously it must have existed not too long after, if not at the same time. And then there's also Lindel, which there are items that speak of Lindel being a rival to Dranglake and so forth. So had Vendrick conquered every other nation, and the ones we know of came after Dranglake's fall, or is it just a throwaway line referring to Vendrick's great power? Perhaps he was the only true king. Then again, apparently now he wasn't a true king, if certain people are to be believed. The Ivory King came from Freyja. Does that mean he came before Vendrick or after? Because Vengal implies, though it's impossible to know for certain, he implies that Vendrick is the one who hired him, and Vengal came to Drangleic after Freyja fell, at which point the Ivory King also, you know, founded Aleim Lois. So, at this point, there are so many questions in regards to the timeline that might need its entire own video. But next up we have new information concerning Lindel, as I mentioned a few moments ago, and the archdrake sect. To sum it up, it is heavily implied that the archdrake sect and the Drake Blood Knights were at some point one and the same, that following Sin's awakening, they fled and later became what we know now. The only knowledge of their founding is hidden away and contains the secrets of Lindel's history. The archdrake shield, robes, and the replenishment spell all seem to support this. Pretty interesting, eh? The fact that those who survived Sin's rather dramatic awakening left to never return, but instead founded the land of Lindel. And although they hid the truth of their nation, they kept their dragon... well, I suppose you can't call it an obsession, but they are certainly very interested in dragons still, even after seeing what Sin did. You know, I'm almost surprised that nobody managed to put it together in the past. It almost seems obvious now, doesn't it, given the slumbering serpent shield. But the Sunken King isn't the only one who gets some new info. We now know why Sir Alonne abandoned the Iron King, if not specifically. The updated Alonne Knight armor suggests that Alonne left the Iron King after his fall into depravity, which we knew a little about, of course. And it does seem to imply that the Iron King changed as time went by, that perhaps once he was a man fitting for Sir Alonne to follow. This could also perhaps suggest that Alonne and the King fought, going by the memory wherein you fight Alonne. Not a huge revelation, but certainly an interesting one, because I mean, I know quite a lot of people were wondering, why did Alonne just up and leave one day? Did he think his work was done, or did he have some falling out with the King? And well, I actually have a lore video coming up in the future, which focuses entirely on Broom Tower, and I actually wrote the script for that before the Scholar patch came out, so that video contains a bit of speculation concerning Alonne's departure, and obviously now we know the answer, but I didn't want to go back and change it because I kinda like the speculation, to be honest. Finally, we've some new information concerning the Lost Bastille and No Man's Wharf. A fearful, paranoid king captured many Varangian pirates and set them to work in No Man's Wharf. And it might be that this king was the king of Alavis, but we learn that during his reign sorcerers in particular were persecuted, and well, look what happened to Strayed, an extremely powerful sorcerer and paranoid king who is terrified of the curse and such. I could see that being the case, because some of the cut content implied that Strayed, he knew the king and the king knew Strayed, and they even fought together to slay an ancient dragon and so forth. We also know that the Bastille was overflowing, not surprising, and some magic-wielding prisoners were put on ships and put out to sea, whereupon most ended up dead, but a few arrived in a southern land, teaching the locals their sorcery, perhaps as thanks to being saved. I'm going to assume this southern land was Melfia, which we know is to the south of Drangleic, and also is known for its magic. They are also known for denying the existence of Guinevere. I wonder if that has anything to do with the teachings of the prisoners. You never know, it could do. Last, but not least, we have a tiny bit of new info concerning Alva and Zullie, suggesting that Alva found some solace after his failure to cure Saint Soretta, with the help of the witch. herself finding illumination in her blighted, unloved existence at last. It seems the pair helped each other in that aspect, each providing a service for the other. And some people are taking this to mean that they became romantically involved, which, you know, it's a fair assumption, I suppose. And that's about all I managed to get from my research. I don't have every item in the game, so I might be missing some new things here and there. And even then, I might have actually missed them in some of the old items, as I was doing this manually and there's a lot of items, and you know, some of them I've not read in a long time, like those troches items. I don't even know how that word's pronounced, but you know, the things that boost your resistance? I probably read their item description back when the game came out, but that was like a year ago now. So, if you know of anything I missed, please do share it in the comments, and let me know what you think about the new changes. I like most of them, I believe. One that I actually forgot to write in my script, and that just came back to me now, is the Stone Giant Axe, which actually gives us some interesting information concerning, again, Vendrick's war. It tells us that King Vendrick disappeared as the war with the giants reached its ferocious peak, leaving his castle. Some swear that upon hearing the news, the Queen's face remained as still as her portrait. And that is actually one of the main ones I noticed and found really interesting. So I'm kind of surprised that I forgot to mention it in my script. Yeah, good game, Mont. As for Alva and Zullie, well, I get asked quite a lot to make a lore video about them, so I guess I'll have to make one. Until then though, see you later. I've got some lore videos on the Lost Crowns trilogy coming up over the next few weeks and months, so I hope you'll enjoy them. And of course, Bloodborne is not too far away, and well, I guess we'll see how that turns out, won't we? And I'm planning to do a full playthrough on Scholar of the First Sin on PS4, so more chances then to, you know, catch any missed items and talk about their implications. But thank you so much for watching. Until next time, take care.